Amy Osetinsky here, instructional designer with CU Online. Today, I had the pleasure of sitting down with Remi Kalir from the School of Education and Human Development to talk about Hypothesis. Hypothesis is a web-based tool that allows anyone to annotate anything on the internet. Remi's been using this tool to have his students collaboratively annotate documents and readings.
Greetings, faculty colleagues. My name is Remi Kalir, and I'm an assistant professor of information and learning technologies at the School of Education and Human Development. I'm finishing my third year as a faculty member here, and I teach classes in the area of digital media and learning, so classes that focus on games, digital storytelling. And I also, as a learning scientist, teach classes about learning theory and research methods. And in all of my courses, I work very intentionally to incorporate a variety of participatory and interactive tools to best support my students' learning. And so today we'll be talking about a tool I use called Hypothesis and the web annotation features that it supports. So you're looking at a Hypothesis page. This is the Hypothesis website. And as you can see, it says you can annotate the web with anyone, anywhere. And I'd like to briefly note that the kind of wide world of annotation is being used well beyond just education. And if you were to visit the Hypothesis website, you can actually learn more about how this web annotation tool is being used in journalism, in the scholarly publication space, as well as in academic peer-reviewed research. And of course, I'm using it in the area of education, and Hypothesis has been used by both K-12 educators as well as many higher education faculty. So what does web annotation look like? Maybe you've not heard about that term before. I'd like to show folks what it looks like online and then bring you into a class and show you how I've been using it with my students. So here, for example, is the Los Angeles Review of Books. This is a web page. This is an article that they published about a year ago, and if you were to visit this web page and look at it, it looks just like any other web page you might see, a whole lot of text online. Now, what I've done is I've embedded a Hypothesis extension onto this page, which allows me to see this page and see the various web annotations that have been added on top of it. And so if I was to activate Hypothesis, I can actually see this page change, and I begin to see highlighted text. And not only highlighted text, but I begin to see where people have begun to layer new information on top of this primary source. And in addition to layering new information, they've begun to have conversations and replies to one another, having in this case a kind of layered discourse that begins to add new information and interactivity on top of a text. And as you can see, annotation content can include hyperlinks, and it can include other media as well, such as video or images. And you can do things in this case like ask a question, which allows people to have threaded conversations within the margins of an online source, not limited by the amount of text or, again, by the kind of media. So this is a very quick view of what web annotation looks like, kind of in the wild, open on the internet. But what about my classes and how I incorporate it into my own teaching? I've now brought us inside of the Canvas learning management system, and this is my games and learning course, a class that I taught just this past spring semester. And this is the modules view. If you were just to come into the class as a student, this is the kind of home landing page, and all of my course modules are laid out here. Various assignments, as well as, of course, our 2-week-long cycles. And what I've done is I've incorporated web annotation as a means of discussion. Rather than have threaded discussion forums, which Canvas does support, I instead am using texts as a location for students' conversation. And so all of these readings here in a given cycle, Katie Salen's work, Jim G's work, this next cycle, Henry Jenkins' work, Reed Stevens, all of these readings are actually linked PDF documents that then allow my students to have conversations with one another. So what does that look like? Well, here's an example. Here's an example from a reading by Sonia Fizek, and the article that my students are reading is called Why Fun Matters in Search of Emergent Playful Experiences. And in some respects, again, this looks like a familiar PDF, but now one that has been annotated. There are layers of comments that my students have contributed to this text. And again, if I go ahead and activate what's called the hypothesis sidebar, I can see my students adding ultimately 87 original annotations and many other replies to one another as they begin to have conversations. And those conversations are sometimes playful. They sometimes kind of gamify the experience by adding interesting media here. And those replies can get pretty deep and pretty interesting rather quickly. And as we scroll through this text, we can see how my students have even embedded videos to that. And then after embedding a video as an annotation, quite a few responses just to that specific annotation. And you can see here how, as I move through the text, I'm able to see my students create their own interest-driven, peer-supported conversation, which is situated within specific passages or even specific words, and allows them to have deep explorations of the given content of text. Long story short, if you're having a student with any kind of content, read any kind of a text, and have some kind of conversation around that, Hypothesis is a great tool that allows you to do so. I'll begin to wrap up here with a few additional comments. One is to point out briefly the kind of facilitation and discursive responsibilities I provide to my students, how they should annotate readings with their thoughts and questions, highlights, and again, additional resources like videos or images or linked resources. How they can use this as a way of having a back and forth conversation that's actually quite informal, and one that doesn't necessarily need to be too didactic or points-based grading, but rather can be driven by, again, their interests and their curiosities, ultimately providing a deeper reading of whatever the text is. So these are some of the ways that I help to scaffold the ways in which students access texts and then have annotation conversations. So I'll wrap up my screencast there. It's been a pleasure to speak at all of you, but hopefully I can speak with some of you in the future if you're interested in incorporating Hypothesis into your own teaching. And if you are, the blog post hosting this video will have a few additional resources, including how to incorporate Hypothesis into Canvas. And there was a webinar specifically about that, hosted by Hypothesis with a variety of links, as well as a follow-up webinar about the pedagogy of collaborative annotation, which I myself was a contributor to. You can watch that here, as well as access a variety of related resources. We'll keep it there. Thanks, folks, and I hope to collaborate and perhaps annotate with you sometime soon. Thanks.